There's news coming about a trade deal between the EU, European Union, and India. But EU is a US vassal, and the US today is acting like an imperial power. Shouldn't it arm twist the EU? So, will the United States arm twist the European Union to not sign a trade deal with India? That's an interesting question. So, there have been, statements coming out from the EU, from Madame Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU, and Madame Kaya Kalas, who is like the foreign minister of the EU, that sort of thing. And they have both said that, Madame Ursula von der Leyen is visiting India in a couple of days for the 26th of January event. And most likely, there will be progress on a trade deal between India and the EU, maybe even a signing of the trade deal between India and the EU when she is here, when she is in India. And it's been described by the EU as the mother of all deals, So that could be a significant game changer potentially. I don't use the word game changer very often, but it could turn out to be a game changer economically for India and the EU, right? Potentially, depending on the parameters of the deal. And the way it's being described by the EU leadership as the mother of all deals sounds like a big deal for sure, right? And of course, we know that the EU is under tremendous pressure from the United States. The US is not just pressurizing nations like India and China and Russia, it's pressurizing its own allies, its own assets, its own vassals, right? Trump has threatened various tariffs on the EU nations about Greenland, and then he has walked back on that threat and so on. So Trump is a mercurial figure. He's going to threaten everybody. He has no issue, no problem imposing massive tariffs on European nations. He threatened Monsieur Macron of France with 200% tariffs on champagne and wines and whatnot. So you never know what the US is going to do with its own allies. It's no longer acting like a friendly power with its allies, with its vassals. So in this kind of a climate, geopolitical climate, where you don't know what's going to happen, where the US is acting like an openly imperial power, like you say, it makes sense for the EU to hedge its bets and make deals with nations like India, China, and China. Maybe not Russia, but definitely India and China. India has a massive market. India has a lot to offer. So the EU would certainly benefit from a trade deal with India. So it's kind of, depending on how the trade deal is structured, it could be a massively beneficial deal for both the EU and for India, mutually beneficial, right? And we know that the EU is a group of nations that, for all intents and purposes, are American vassals. So what happens? Will the US pressurize the EU into not signing this trade deal? I think the US is not in a situation where it can do that, right? I mean, what's it going to threaten the EU with? A military invasion? Tariffs? Don't sign a deal with India or I'll tariff you to hell. So most likely the trade deal will happen. Looks like the way the pronouncements are being made, it looks like it's kind of almost settled, the parameters of the deal. That's how it sounds like. So let's wait and watch a couple of days. I think the US will not be able to arm twist the EU into not signing a trade deal with India. Looks like it's almost done. But who knows? You never know. So I think we're going to have to wait and watch the next couple of days, next 2-3 days, see what happens. Most likely the trade deal will be signed. If not, then if the US somehow manages to prevent the signing of a trade deal between India and the EU, that would be a very massively hostile act against India and against the EU both, right? So let's see. Let's wait and watch. It's going to be a couple of days. I expect that the trade deal will get signed. Of course, if that happens, it benefits the EU, it benefits India as well, and it kind of reduces the effect that American tariffs and threats and arm twisting will have on the EU and on India also, right? See, the US has essentially priced India out of its market. The US has imposed what, 50% tariffs right now on India. And if you're an Indian business, okay, let's say you are an Indian business owner, and let's say you are exporting something to the US. Let's say you're exporting hats to the US. Just a very random example. Let's say you're exporting cowboy hats to the US. Okay, and you can manufacture cowboy hats and sell them to to a US company at a very uh, relatively cheap price. So let's say a cowboy hat is sold for $100 in the US, but I can, let's say, if you're producing them in India, you're gonna be able to produce them for, let's say, $10, and you sell the hats to the American company at $20 a piece. Then they're gonna sell it to their customers at $80 a piece, right? But if the tariffs are 50%, then they're gonna have to pay 50% of what they are paying to you to the US government. So they're going to pay you 20, they're going to pay 10 to the US government, and then they can only have the remaining $70 instead of $80. Maybe not a great example. Maybe you're selling something for $50, they're going to sell it for $80, but now it becomes 75 because they have to pay 25 more, and that makes it commercially unviable for them. So what happens is that if you are in this business of exporting stuff to the US, then you will stop getting orders, you'll stop getting contracts, right? And that's what's hitting so many Indian businesses right now, because American partners are kind of wary of buying things from India, because who knows what tariffs Trump will impose. He's talking about 500% tariffs also. That sort of threat if India keeps buying Russian oil. So India is getting pushed out of the American market by Trump. So it makes sense to export to the EU, right? So that's why it could be a win-win thing for India and the EU. And obviously that Trump will not be pleased if this happens. So maybe he may try to interfere, but I expect he may not succeed. So let's wait and watch a couple of days, 2-3 days, and let's see what's the outcome of the visit of the EU leadership to India, which begins the next couple of days. Let's wait and watch. I expect it most likely the trade deal will get done.